Welcome to Brain Wellness, the podcast. I'm your host, Mandy NP. Each episode will bring you a new topic or interview related to brain health and wellness as part of my mission to help you on the path to a healthier, happier brain. So, let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. My guest today is Mr. Dick Beardsley. Dick is a best-selling author and champion in running and in life. He is a two-time winner of Grandma's Marathon in Duluth, Minnesota, and the winner of the first London Marathon in 1981. His performance at the 1982 Boston Marathon is still considered one of the greatest marathon races of all time, and he is still one of the top American distance runners of all time. Today, Dick is a compelling motivational and inspirational speaker and co-author of his autobiography, Staying the Course. In addition to traveling the world giving motivational talks, he and his wife, Jill, own Lake Bemidji Bed and Breakfast in Minnesota, and he is also a local area fishing guide. And I am super excited to have you here today with me. Thank you so much, Dick.
Mandy, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to this. This will be a lot of fun.
Yes. And as I was telling Dick before we got recording here, this is an honor for me because Dick is a childhood hero of my own. And I got to meet him at my first long distance race when I ran the 1 mile race in Rush City, Minnesota, called the Plastic Six, part of the Plastic Six race back in 1983. So I was 3 years old, not quite 4 that year. And it took me 20 minutes to run that race. But I was showing him before we got started. I'll post these pictures online, pictures of when I got my little award from
Love
him
it.
when I was 3 years old. And I just love the little picture of me and my little teeny,
Oh,
socks up to
awesome.
my knees. Can't beat that. So why did I ask you to come on a brain wellness podcast? Running has always been my kind of escape and way to get myself right in the head. So that's why I wanted you to come on with me today, to really kind of talk about how this plays into our brain wellness and mental health.
Oh, Mandy, it's the same way for me too. In fact, people ask me how I got started running and things like that. And, growing up here in Minnesota, my whole world growing up revolved around the outdoors, hunting and fishing and trapping. And, I started my own fishing guide business when I was, 12, 13 years old. And I was just into the outdoors. And the one thing growing up, my folks, as I got older, they didn't get along real well. And I remember at night they'd come home from going out for supper or whatever, and they'd be yelling and screaming at each other, and it wasn't a fun situation. And so a lot of times what I would do is when my folks started kind of just going opposite directions of what me and my two little sisters were hoping they'd go, sometimes I just would take my little black lab Sam, and we just take off and go hiking through the woods. Didn't know how long I was going to be gone, how far I'd gone, but that was kind of my first almost long distance hiking, I guess you would call it, that really just kind of calmed me down. And when I would get back home from that, I might not have a solution to the problem, but I always felt a lot more positive about things. And then it just kind of evolved into when I did get into running when I was 17 years old and a junior in high school. I got into running by accident. Mainly I was such a shy kid growing up. I wanted to have a date with a girl, and up to that point, girls were not even in my vision. And then it was like my hormones changed, but I was so shy and bashful. And then I noticed that a lot of my buddies that had done well in sports, wearing their high school letter jackets around school, they always had girls hanging all over them. So I thought, that's it. I'll earn myself a letter jacket and the chicks will come to me. Well, I went out for the football team and I lasted less than an hour. And I remember getting gang tackled the first day of practice. And I don't know how many guys were on top of me. And I'm thinking, as I worked my way out of this massive humanity, I'm thinking, there's not a girl alive worth going through this. And I quit. And less than a week later, I went out for the cross country team. Was terrible, but fell in love with the sport and been doing it ever since.
I love that. That's not exactly how I got into running, but
We kind of get into things for different reasons at different times, but then it all kind of comes full circle.
yeah. So how'd you get into the long distance running from that then?
Yeah. So I went out for cross country my junior year, so that would have been in 1973. And I remember our coach saying, "All right, boys, line up out in front of the school there. We're going to do the around the block run." Now, I'd never run before. And I had on a pair of, you don't even know what these are. They were called Jack Purcell bumper tennis shoes. And they were blue canvas with an all white rubber toe. And on the end of that white rubber toe was a raised blue line. So they were the nerdiest, goofiest looking things. I didn't know they made running shoes. I had a pair of black nylon stockings that went up above my knees and a pair of white gym shorts that were my dad's because I couldn't find any that morning. And I had a black belt cinched around them so they wouldn't fall to my knees. So the coach says, "All right, boys, line up. We're going to do the around the block run." And as I said, I'd never run before, but I knew I was determined enough and I was stubborn enough. Surely I could run around the block. Well, let's just say this. The around the block was actually 3.2 miles long. And I had to walk the last mile. I couldn't run it. And by the time I got back to my high school parking lot, my coach and all my teammates had already showered and gone home. But when I crossed into the parking lot of the high school in that imaginary finish line, I was so excited. I remember thinking, I don't know how far I just ran a walk. It seemed like, you know, forever, but I made it. And I remember saying to myself, "Gosh, Dick, if you, do what your coach tells you to do, believe in yourself, don't give up. I'll bet you can get good enough to make the varsity squad, to earn the letter jacket, to get the date with a girl." That was my whole inspiration for running at that point. And of course, I didn't make the varsity squad and until my senior year. I never made it to a state meet here in Minnesota in cross country or track, but I'd fallen in love with the sport. And it seemed like the further I ran, the better I seemed to do. So that's kind of how I kind of quickly progressed right up to being a long distance runner.
That's funny. So yeah, I did my short little stint of my 1 mile runs when I was teeny tiny there. And I think I got my fastest when I was 9 years old. Beyond that, I was a sprinter. So I sprinted
Yeah.
all the way through high school. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I started doing 5Ks. And then I trained for figured if I could do a 5K, I could do a 10K. And then I did a half marathon and I've now done 13 of those. And then hopefully we'll be running Grandma's Marathon here this summer. As I mentioned before we started recording, I was supposed to run it 2 years ago when we got in our car accident and I had my brain injury. And
Yes.
I was not able to run for the longest time. And I got to tell you, I missed it so much. So that mental part where you kind of got out in the woods when you first went out for that long hike,
Yeah.
that's the part that why do you think that is? What you've been doing this for so long, you've been doing it much longer than I have. Why do you think that's so
Yeah.
good for our brains?
I don't know what it is. It's always been that way for me. Even as I became an adult and, maybe I'd have a little squabble with my wife or something, or one of the kids or something would upset me. And I never get like mad. I mean, I get upset, but I'm not a screamer and a hollower and throwing things like that. But if something's really bothering me, that's what I would do. To this day, I put my shoes on and I go out for a run. And like I said earlier, same thing with the hike. When I come back, I might not have a solution to the problem, but I just have this way more better outlook towards trying to solve the problem. And it works. It worked for me as a little kid with my dog Sam, and now at almost 69 years old, it still works to this day.
Yeah. Yep. I've always said I can solve the world's problems while I'm out running. It just,
I,
it might not come to fruition, but in my head it's solved.
right.
I
Oh,
have
for sure.
I have so many conversations that are difficult to have, and I have them all sorts of different ways until I finally come up with the relaxation at the end. And it is
Yeah,
just such a calming feeling when you get done with that.
it is. And people, when I retired from that high level of racing and training back in the late 1980s, a lot of my friends and people in the know said, "Well, you'll quit running, or you might still run a little bit, but you'll never run another race again because you'll be so upset that you could never get back to those fast times again." And that never ever bothered me. And even when I got into my 40s and then became a master's runner, I kind of got back into it a little bit again, and was actually not just running, but I was actually training. And, I couldn't run 208 marathons anymore, but into my 50s, I could run, marathons into the 240s and things like that. And, but now I'm not running right now because I've had some bad issues with an infection in one of my knee replacements, but I'll get back to it. But even now, I run every day. I will again, but right now I can't because of my knee. But up to the having the knee issue, I ran every day, and I run about 5 miles every day. I get up at 2:45 in the morning and have my little coffee, and I go out for my morning run. And people go, "Are you nuts? You running at 3 o'clock in the morning?" But Mandy, I've always been an early riser, and I can't tell you how many times here in Bemidji I'd be out there on that early morning run, and I look up. I get emotional about this, and I see these northern lights dancing in the sky, and I'm thinking, "Thank you, Lord Jesus." I said, 99.9% of the people in town are sound asleep, and look what I get to basically have all to myself. And so I see all that kind of stuff. And honestly, I enjoy it as much today, if not more, than I did back in my competitive days. But like I tell people now, if I ran any slower, I'd be going backwards. But I still love doing it.
Oh, that makes me want to get up really early one of these days. I used to live about an hour north of where we are now, and I could see those northern lights when I was a kid, and I have not
Yeah.
seen them since. This whole last year, that when they kept showing in the news that it was coming down farther south into Minnesota, we
Right.
were out, we were watching, and we would go for drives, and we still didn't see it. So 3 o'clock in the morning, that's when I got to get out there.
They are spectacular.
Oh, they are. What has kept you running all these years? What keeps you going?
It's just, I tell you, it's like getting up in the morning, having a bowl of cereal, or going to bed at a certain time at night. It's become part of my daily habit, my daily routine. It really is. And people say, "Well, you get up so early and blah blah blah." But you know what? On those few days that I do miss for one reason or another, I'm a I'm a lot more lethargic during the day. When I get up and I get it done right away, and I'm thinking, and because I'm with people every day, and I love people. I've got people in my boat, and I'm on the water every single day once the open water season gets here, and I love people. But I also like that little bit of time that it's just me. It's me and the good Lord. Nobody's there to pull me one direction or pull me the other direction, and I cherish that. And even now, even though I can't run right now, I still get up at about 2:45, and I get on our treadmill, and I go for an hour walk on the treadmill trying to rehab my knee. And even though it's inside right now, I cherish that. I just really look forward to that time that I give just myself, and I cherish it every single day.
Hmm. We always talk about that need for self-care and taking care of your own self, and it sounds like you have that mastered.
Well, I tell you, my wife Jill she's a sweetheart. Through all this knee issue I'm dealing with, I had my first this knee put in the first time in 2010, and then in 2018 they had to do a revision because it got loose, and now for the last year and a half I've had 10 or 11 surgeries on it, and finally they took the knee out late August. It was filled. They took the knee out. It was all infected really bad. I was sicker than a dog, and they filled it with a spacer made of cement and embedded with heavy duty antibiotics. Sewed it back up. I had a PICC line in my right arm. I had to give myself antibiotics IV 3 times a day. Couldn't put any weight on the leg at all. 99% of the day was spent in my recliner, and I had to um, pass on all my guide trips I had booked for all of September and October. But it's getting better. Although now I'm dealing. it opened back up again on Christmas Day. And now we're dealing with that. I had another surgery on it, and it's still staying open. So we'll see what happens. Like, kiddingly, I told the doc, I said, Doc, this is getting crazy. I said, maybe, with these new prostheses that are out there for people with amputated legs, I said, maybe we should just amputate the darn thing. And I said, we wouldn't have to worry about any more knee problems anymore. And he didn't, I was saying it jokingly. He didn't think that was real funny, um, but you just deal with it. Things happen. And my wife, Jill's been great, helping me through all that too. So I give her a lot of credit.
Goodness. You don't let a lot keep you down though. Even with
You
through all
know,
of this, you're still keeping a positive attitude.
well, and people say, where do you get that from? And I don't know. I've been blessed with it, honestly. And I've had people say you're a Pollyanna or something, whatever that means. I guess it means you think everything's going to turn out great or something like that. And I'm a realist too, but I could like let's just, for example, with my knee, I could sit there and whine about it and mope about it and feel sorry for myself. Is that going to make it get any better? No. In fact, if anything, it could make it, not heal as quickly. And so I look at it as, listen, I've always looked at situations in my life that these things happen for a reason. I've always looked at things like that, and they happen for a reason, and there's a reason they happened, and there's also a reason I'm still here. And so, when I went through that whole addiction with the narcotic painkillers and I'd never want to go through that again. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And then, when I lost my son Andy to suicide when he got back from the Iraqi war, gosh, it's hard to believe it's been 9 years now. Because of the runner I once was, like the addiction to the narcotics got a lot of media attention because of that. If I was John Doe lived down the neighborhood, nobody would even know about it except probably close family. Because of that, a number of years of sobriety, and I think 29 years now, and I've been invited to speak at treatment centers around the country, to go out to schools around Minnesota and all over the country and talk about that addiction. And because if it can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. Because I was about as straight-laced kid growing up as you could imagine. Never did any illegal drugs, didn't drink anything like that. And the same thing with when Andy passed, from suicide. It would have been easy. That was without doubt. That made the addiction seem like a walk in the park. There's nothing in the world worse for a parent to lose a child. And again, there were times I wanted to just roll up in a ball and go into a corner and never come back out again. But I thought, no, that's the last thing Andy would want me to do. And so since it's been over 9+ years now since his passing, I've been able to go out and I've spoken at a lot of schools and mental health seminars, things like that, about, suicide, mental health, and things like that. So, like I said, when I started doing this with the addiction, so if one person, say I'm speaking on my addiction, one person hears me and decides that, wow, I can get through this. I'm going to get my life back. I'm going to go to treatment. And I can't tell you how many people, and especially high school kids, that have come up to me after a talk like that and crying and hugging me and saying, thank you. And then when Andy passed from suicide, I've been able to do the same thing. And I tell Andy's story and how it involved me and my family. And I can't tell you how many kids I've had at high schools, again, come up crying and saying, man, I was thinking life isn't worth living. And, giving me these big hugs and thanking me. And so even though Andy's passed and I would do anything to reverse that, something good has come of that. And I know Andy looks down and saying, Pop, thanks for helping other people. So that helps me a lot too. So sorry.
No apologies necessary. That's 100% real there. And I am so sorry that you guys lost him. I am glad that you've used it to make something positive. So that's
Yeah,
not everybody does that.
no, and listen, and I don't look down on people that end up kind of rolling into a ball and don't want to be, just their world just kind of comes to an end. Listen, everybody's different. I just happened to be fortunate. I chose to go the other direction, and thankfully for people that are kind of still in that sand pit, so to say, there's lots of people that you can turn to get help to get you through those things and whatnot. And I remember after Andy died, my wife Jill and I, she said, I think, and Andy was, my wife Jill was Andy's stepmom, and they were close. But she goes, I think, we need to go to a grief counseling, And so I said, yeah, maybe we'll see. So I remember we went to this group counseling it was within less than 2 weeks after Andy passed. And so we're in this group meeting, and I know how these meetings go because went through them 30 years ago with the the addiction to the narcotics. And but I'm listening to these people, and they're blaming God, and they're blaming this, and that person for what had happened. And they're saying, if there was really a God, this would have never happened. And I almost got up and walked out, but when I stayed, and when the session was all over, I said, I do not need this kind of help, because this is not help at all to me. And I just dealt with it my own self. And and that seemed to work for me. But now maybe I just had a bad group I was in, but I got out of there and I was down in the dumps. Honest to gosh, I thought, okay, it's a bad situation, but my anyhow. So everybody deals with it their own way, and whatever way works best without turning to drugs or alcohol or something. Some people will find their comfort in that, and of course, that's not a good thing either. So it's a tough situation, that's for sure.
It is. And I can't say that I haven't had similar situations. I actually used to lead a support group for stroke survivors and their family members. And I loved the group that we had that would come on a regular
Oh,
basis. It filled a bucket for me helping them on a monthly basis as well. But when I had my own brain injury, I could not get myself to go to a support group because I knew how negative some of those groups can get. And that negativity does not help everyone
right.
heal.
No, it does. And going back to uh, 1996 when I first got into treatment, and I was going to a treatment over in Fargo, North Dakota, and my counselor was Sue Stengen Brown. Her brother was the uh, a bigwig in North Dakota he was the Secretary of State or something like that. Anyhow, but Sue was a counselor, and after maybe the second or third time she brought me into her office, she goes, okay, listen, you got to quit putting on this show that you're just happy and upbeat all the time. She goes, listen, take that off your face. I go, Sue, no. I go, that's just the way I am. She goes, no, it's not. I go, well, yeah, it is. Well, Sue and I, listen, once a week, she did this with everybody, but once a week we'd have one-on-one, just me and her. And we got into it sometimes. But I loved her. And because she knew when to give me a hug and she knew when to give me a kick in the hinder. And unfortunately, in fact, I was fortunate. I was in treatment and including aftercare for a year. And 2 days or one day before my 1 year sobriety anniversary, Sue had me come back to speak to a new group of people. And so I get all done with my talk, telling my story, and Sue comes up and she goes, I'd like to give Dick his 1 year medallion. I wouldn't take it. I said, Sue, I will be back tomorrow evening if I'm sober. And I came back the next evening, and I gave her, or she gave me my medallion. And then, a couple of years later, Sue opened her own treatment center, and I would come over to speak at it twice a year. And then she got Alzheimer's, uh, very and it took her life very, very quickly. And so she was on her deathbed, and I was over to speak at her treatment center, and I got done, and one of the head people there said, Dick, they go, Sue's not seen anybody, but she wants to see you. So I drove over to her house, and they had a hospital bed in their living room looking out the window, and we spent about 30 minutes together. And she died the next day. And she she saved my life. She really did. I can't say enough about her. And sorry, I'm getting off the wrong direction there, but she's the one, and she did apologize to me. Before my first year of sobriety, she goes, "No, Dick, I got to apologize for what I said to you back in the beginning." I said, that is who you are. And thank you for being who you are. That's who I am. I'm at 60, almost 69. I'm not going to change now. If you meet me at a talk somewhere, or you meet me out on the boat, or at the local grocery store, you get the same Dick Beardsley, no matter where you are. It is who I am, and I'm not going to change at this late date in my life, nor would I want to.
I think those were wise
So
words that she said then. Because just in this little bit of time here today, I don't remember meeting you when I was 3 years old, but the Dick Beardsley that I'm chatting with today is somebody that I would absolutely be grateful to have next door, or just have a conversation with. So I love who you are. Thank you also for being you.
well, thank you. I appreciate that. You're very welcome.
So you have had so many experiences. Is the Was the addiction what got you into speaking initially?
No, I'll tell you that got me in there. To be honest with you, Mandy. So when listen, growing up in school, I was a most shy kid. I remember in elementary school, you'd be sitting at your little desk, and teacher would be up there doing an assignment, and he'd start picking on people, to answer questions. Man, I'd slide down in my seat. So, of course, then he'd always pick on me when I would do that. And I never would raise my hand to answer questions or anything like that. Well, growing up, I got involved in 4-H as a young kid when I was 8 years old, when you could start. Well, when I was a junior in high school, I was elected president of our local 4-H club. So I had to run the meetings. I was scared to death. And especially when all the kids in your club, because they all go to school with you, and some of our neighbors and stuff. And, you'd be up there running the meeting, and a couple of them are doing spitballs at you and things like that. But I learned how to get up in front of a small crowd. And then through 4-H, I got to do some fishing demonstrations at the Minnesota State Fair during the fair. So then I was up in front of a lot of people. Well, then when I got into running, and my running kind of took off, and I'd get invited to a race somewhere, the race director would say, Hey, Dick, do you mind saying a few words at the pasta dinner tonight, the night before the race? I said, no, I'd be more than happy to. So I'd get up there and tell a few stories. Well, so then when my running took off, and, I was able to, win some big races and things like that, the local service organizations back in any town, they're looking for anybody to come and speak. You don't get paid, but you get a nice hot meal or something like that. So I was speaking at a either a Lions or a Noon Rotary or something in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, and got done. And afterwards, a fella came up to me, and that owned a company in town, and he says, Dick, he goes, do you think you could come out and speak to me? Up to this point, I just did it because they asked me to do it. He says, listen, I can pay you $500. I about fell down. Hey, $500? Yeah. He said, could you speak for like 45 minutes? I said, well, sure. And it just kind of grew from there. I'm a really, really, I don't like talking about myself, but a really, really good storyteller. And I'll tell you, so what I do if a company approaches me and says, I want you to come and speak to our employees, here's what I want you to try to cover in your talk. And so I use stories to get those messages across because we all have them. And I don't get up there and talk numbers and things like that. I use life stories, and you learn part of that from when I was a kid growing up. One of my dad's closest friends was a guy named Bernie Backman here in Bemidji. Bernie was a hunting and fishing guide, and he was my mentor growing up. And I remember going out in the boat with Bernie and my dad. I could have cared less if we caught any fish. Listening to Bernie's stories, oh my gosh, they were worth the price of admission. And as I got older, and as I look back, Bernie would be telling a story, and he'd always give a little wink to my dad. So I'm sure they were super embellished, but I didn't care at all. And so, and I've helped a number of young people get into the fishing guide business because I can't take all the requests. And I tell people, I tell these young men and a couple gals, you don't have to have a brand new boat, but good equipment. You have to be knowledgeable, but more than anything, you've got to be a people person. You've got to be able to get into a boat with people you probably don't know, and the fish aren't always jumping in the boat. So you got to tell a few stories. Pretty soon that opens them up. They tell a few stories. And I've got guy clients I've had for 40 plus years that come back year after year after year. The same stories get told, but the fish keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I just absolutely love it.
That sounds like a lot of fun too. Um,
It is.
I grew up fishing all the time. My gosh, we were out. I was sitting on a bucket on the ice all the time in northern
Oh,
Minnesota with my
yes.
parents growing up. So I have not been on a bucket since I was probably 10 years old, but um, just hearing that makes me want to go do it again. So I can see how telling those stories will
Oh,
get people totally into the experience.
yeah, yeah. And now, Mandy, now I've got these fancy fish houses that with bunks, color television, stove, oven, bathrooms. When I was a kid, so again, sitting on the 5 gallon bucket with, like with my dad out fishing, and he'd take an empty coffee can and put charcoal in the bottom and light it and put it next to my hole, and it would kind of leave, you know, help keep the ice from forming. And then if my hands got cold, which they always did, I could kind of warm them up. And then he always had a 4x8 sheet of plywood in the back of his truck. So if it was windy, he'd prop it up in the snow. Man, if you had that little coffee can with charcoal and that windbreak, oh, you were in seventh heaven. Now I can't even get people to fish in portables anymore. They want to be in those fancy fish houses, which is fine because once you fish in them, you don't want to fish any other way in the wintertime.
That's what I'm afraid of. That's why I haven't tried it yet. I was good with my bucket. Oh,
Oh, me
funny.
too.
That's funny. That's funny. And are you still doing your races every fall too?
Yeah, so in Detroit Lakes, we do our the Dick Beardsley half marathon, and we have a half marathon, a 10K, and the 5K is has been now since Andy passes the Andy Beardsley Memorial 5K, and this coming up this September, so it's always the first Saturday after Labor Day. It will be our 30th running of the Beardsley races. Now, I got to tell you something. So, two incredibly good friends of mine, David Bird, who used to live in Detroit Lakes, and Mark Fritz, who was born and raised in Detroit Lakes and started Lake Shirts, it's a t-shirt company that they're huge. Anyhow, in 1995, I think it was, they said, "Hey, Beards," they called me up. "Hey, can you meet us at the Lakeside Tavern for lunch? We want to talk to you about something." I said, "Sure." So I drove down there. They go, "Yeah, we're thinking of putting on, it's about a half marathon around Big and Little Detroit Lake. We're thinking of putting on a half marathon to promote tourism after the main summer season." I go, "Oh, that's a great idea." And they're going, "Yeah, we're kind of trying to come up with some names." So I'm coming up with all these names about all the lakes and things like that. And finally, they looked at each other and they go, "Gee, we're kind of hoping we could call it the Dick Beardsley Half Marathon." And I go, "Seriously?" I go, if you think it might help and not hurt the race." Well, the first year we had maybe 100 runners. I don't think either one of us ever thought that 30 years later, it would still be going. And now every year we get a couple thousand runners for it. And I tell you, Mandy, I get way too much credit. Honestly, it's got my name on it. I show up the day before. I take a group of our sponsors that have been sponsors since day one out on a fishing trip. I do a little talk that night at the pasta dinner. I show up for the race the next morning, and that's it. It's the town of Detroit Lakes that they've, done such a wonderful job with this race. They do all the work, setting up the course, promoting it, things like that. But it's the fact that it's 30 years is pretty amazing to me, to be honest with you.
Yeah, that is pretty remarkable.
You should come and run it sometime.
I was just going to say I might have to do that this year, depending on how successful I am with my run training this year. That sounds like a really fun thing. I think the 30th year would be the great time to do it.
Absolutely. You betcha.
Heck yeah. I could probably talk to you all day, Dick, but I think we'll probably have to wrap up here a little bit. Is there any other words of advice or wisdom or anything you'd like to share with our listeners as we close out?
I would. Here's what I'd like to share with folks. And by the way, good luck at the Grandma's Marathon in June 2025. And this will be your first full marathon, correct?
It will.
Yeah. And like I tell people, when you run a marathon, when you cross that finish line, no matter how fast or how slow, it will change your life forever for the better. There will never, ever be another thing in your life that you will say, I can't do that without at least trying. That's the key, without at least trying. But here's something that I try to share with people, and I've done this for as long as I can remember. And I usually finish my talk off with this, and it's just 4 simple little things that I try to do every single morning when I wake up. But these 4 things have helped me through some difficult times in my life, and I'll share them with our listeners here. And here's what I try to do every morning when I wake up. I try to wake up with a smile on my face, enthusiasm in my voice, joy in my heart, and faith in my soul. And those 4 things have gotten me through some difficult times, and maybe they'll just might help one of our listeners get through some of those difficult times too. So there you go.
Good way to end it. I will share all the social media links in our show notes as well. So if anybody wants to get a hold of you, if they want to find that race website, what's a good website that you can toss out real quick as they're listening at the end here?
Yeah, I think the race website is dickbeardsleyracers.com. And then they can also just go to dickbeardsley.com and get information on my speaking, on my fishing guide, and there'll be a link to the race in there also.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here today, Dick. This was literally a dream come true. I've been thinking about this for a long time, so I am so grateful to have you here today.
Mandy, thank you. And this has been a real treat for me too. So you take care.
You as well. Thank you.
You betcha. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Brain Wellness, the podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to subscribe, like, and share this with others to help me continue on with my mission to help people live healthier, happier lives. Go to www.brainwellnesssolutions.com to see what I'm up to and get links to all the social medias there. See you next time.